I do believe anyone can be a thought leader. All you need is a unique point of view, consistent demonstration of it, and bringing people along for the ride. That's the connecting piece.
Hi, I'm Chloe Deco, and with more than a decade of experience working with thought leaders, I've witnessed firsthand the impact of conviction combined with purpose-driven entrepreneurship. This podcast shows you how to authentically bring together leadership, equity, and marketing to build your authority so that you can grow your impact and scale your business. This is a space for elevating women's voices and redefining what it means to be a thought leader. Together, we'll unlock the potential of our bright voices and create a ripple effect of change that resonates far beyond the realms of business. This is the Bright Voices in Business podcast. Now let's dive into today's episode. Today, I'm here with Mel Ripp, who is the founder and CEO of Peapod Marketing and PR Consulting. Fueled by the notion that everyone has the insights and expertise to be a thought leader in their industry, specifically women entrepreneurs and executives who may have shied away from shining a light on themselves for a variety of reasons. Mel specializes in thought leadership, personal branding, and ghostwriting that helps business owners and leaders that want to be visible in a way that balances all their own stories and perspectives with their values, comfort level, and goals. Thanks for joining me, Mel.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited too. I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about thought leadership and what that actually looks like and means. And I'm just really excited to be able to bring this conversation that we've had between the two of us to the masses so that we can start revisiting what this term thought leadership actually means.
Yeah, me too, because there are so many levels of business jargon and just, messaging jargon and all of these things. But thought leadership is definitely one of those phrases that people are like, it's almost like they recoil because they're either not sure what it means, they don't consider themselves to be one. There's a whole bunch of things. But yes, I agree with you. I'm really excited to get started.
Yes, and even I can relate to this as somebody who worked in PR and marketing agencies for over a decade. Even as somebody who worked on thought leadership strategies, felt cringy sometimes about the work and the people who were being elevated as thought leaders. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation because I know you and I, when we take a step back, we define thought leadership differently than the traditional terms that are used in the C-suite or among some of the startup culture. And so I would love to turn it over to you to just talk about how you define thought leadership as somebody who works a lot with women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I actually gave a presentation on this once, and what I did was I put the thought leadership definition that Forbes had come up with. And then the next slide was like my definition. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to read both of those, or I'd like to talk about both of those. Is that cool?
Yeah, go for it.
So Forbes, obviously we're not strangers to Forbes magazine and Forbes's online presence. But when I read their definition of thought leadership, it was just through an article from somebody on like the Forbes Communication Council. And they said, a thought leader is an individual that prospects, clients, referral sources, intermediaries, and even competitors recognize as one of the foremost authorities in selected areas of specialization, resulting in being the go-to individual for said expertise. And I don't know about you, but when I read all of that, my initial thought was like, what a bunch of word salad. Like intermediaries, like what are we going to battle? Like it's so confusing to me. And so when I gave my definition, I said, and there are some consistencies there, but I said, look, being a thought leader means having a strong, unique point of view, consistently demonstrating that point of view, and connecting with people through that point of view. It's about the way you think. It's about the ideas you have and how you're making that thought process visible to others. And the reason that I wanted to bring those two definitions up is I think one of the things about thought leadership that is super cringe is just that it has been kind of, I don't know, pasteurized or it's been washed in this corporate jargon. And I think like with all corporate jargon, we start to think about things like, oh, I don't have intermediaries. I can't be a thought leader, and I'm not saying that we do that. I'm not saying that we read a definition and we can't kind of think beyond that. But I do think that honestly, I think I literally say it on my website. I do believe anyone can be a thought leader. All you need is a unique point of view, consistent demonstration of it, and bringing people along for the ride. That's the connecting piece. Honestly, if you have a unique point of view, but you're not connecting or consistently demonstrating, it's still noise, right? It's still this place where you're just kind of shouting an opinion into the void. And so I think the connection piece is so important. It's not a one-sided thing. That's just kind of how I feel or what I think of it when I think of my own definition of thought leadership.
Yeah, definitely. That resonates with me a lot. For me, this is where I feel we are very aligned. For me, a thought leader is first a leader, and leadership can take so many different forms. And there are so many different types of leaders. And yet at the end of the day, you first have to be a thought leader who lives in integrity. And then you extend that leadership to the ability to help shape and change people's opinions and minds. And that's where the term thought comes in for me. So it's really about helping people think in a different way or see a different perspective that they hadn't seen before. And the fun thing is that we all have unique perspectives. We all see the world through our own lens. And so that does enable anybody to step up and be a thought leader if they choose to be. I do want to ask you, because I know you've gotten pushback in the past, that this definition, this idea that anybody can be a thought leader is actually kind of controversial. So I would love to hear what kind of pushback or resistance you've gotten when you've shared that message.
Well, I have to admit that one person literally said to me, well, not everyone can be a thought leader. I mean, people who, abuse animals can't be thought leaders. And I'm like, okay, let's kind of take the everyone out of the equation and stop taking it so literally. First of all, of course, I don't care about somebody who might abuse cats. I don't care about their unique point of view. But I have gotten some pushback. And one of the things that I continually hear is, I cannot call myself a thought leader. That is a title that has to be bestowed. And to that, I say, who is going to bestow it? In my work and in the work that I do with my female entrepreneur clients and my female leadership clients, I have had conversation upon conversation where the basic foundation of the conversation has been, I kept waiting for somebody to see that I was good at my job, that I had great insights, that I had the expertise and experience to climb the ladder or do a different job or be on a stage. And no one ever tapped me on the shoulder. And to that, I usually say, well, good, because you're tapping yourself on the shoulder now, right? And I think that there's a lot of agency that comes with, and I don't go around saying I'm a thought leader. I got that in a workshop I was doing a couple weeks ago. Somebody asked me, do you consider yourself to be a thought leader? And I said, I do, but my name is not Melissa Ripp, thought leader. I'm not, kind of putting that out into the world in that way. But I guess I'm just really tired of feeling like we need permission from someone. And I don't believe that that's the case. And so that is the one thing that I get over and over is just like, oh, well, I think thought leadership has to be earned. And I'm like, well, who's deciding who gets to earn it? So anyway, I could go on for a long time about that one, but I won't.
Well, and what comes up for me as you say that is you have to do the work to grow your thought leadership anyway, right? So in doing that work, you are earning the opportunity to be a thought leader. I also want to talk about the responsibility that you have as a thought leader, because I also think, I know it's a buzzword these days, but imposter syndrome tends to come up. And I remember, I'll share a little bit of my take on imposter syndrome because I think this is helpful. I remember listening to a podcast by James Wedmore. He has a podcast called Mind Your Business. And there is an entire episode on imposter syndrome. I highly recommend it if anyone struggles with that. But in his episode, he talks about the fact that imposter syndrome is actually a good thing because it makes you realize that when you go after leadership or being a thought leader or any type of role that requires you to have influence over other people, you are realizing the responsibility that that type of role has. And so I do think sometimes imposter syndrome gets a bad rap, and there are ways that you get stuck in imposter syndrome that are not productive. However, it also shows that you're a caring human and you don't want to take advantage of that role of power and influence that you have as you reach that position.
Absolutely. If I can just add on to that a little bit, the imposter syndrome conversation we could probably talk all day about. But my coach, whose name is Dr. Donna Marino, she has a really great way of looking at imposter syndrome. And she's like, look, what if imposter syndrome is really just like, why don't we call it what it is? Which for most of us is fear, right? And when we call something a syndrome, we pathologize it. We make it a condition. And so tracing that back to thought leadership, I agree with you, Chloe. I feel like I take my responsibility as a thought leader. That feels weird to say out loud. Sorry. But I take my responsibility as a thought leader very seriously because I feel like I have two audiences as a thought leader. I want to speak to the women that are starting in business right now that didn't have someone that was 5 years into her own journey. And I also want to, appeal to women executives and entrepreneurs that are tired of kind of biting their lip metaphorically and not saying the things that they really want to say and the point of views that they want to get out into the world. And I think that I love that idea about imposter syndrome not necessarily being a bad thing because it does mean that you're thinking very critically about the opinions and the content and the expertise that you're putting out into the world because you want to make sure that they'll be received and that they'll be received in a way that's helpful to other people. So I completely agree with that. I'm going to have to listen to that podcast episode.
Yeah, it's excellent. I'm curious. So that's, to me, this imposter syndrome is definitely an objection that we hear a lot around not pursuing this path to thought leadership. I'm curious what other objections you tend to see when you're in conversations with other women entrepreneurs.
Yes. So the biggest one is either I don't have anything to say or I don't have anything new to say. So, that is, and to me, with all due respect, because I have heard that a bunch of times, that is such a cop-out to yourself. I was reading this is a blog from a couple years ago, and it's a now defunct content marketing platform called Animals. And this woman, I just loved how she said that when we think of thought leadership, why don't we think about it as more earned secrets? This idea that through our years of, whatever it's been, right? Our years of business ownership, our years of working in corporate, our years of working at Target, like whatever it is, we have compiled these nuggets of information and these pivotal points in our journeys. And what I always tell the women that I work with is that milestones to you are milestones until you give them meaning. Until you give things meaning, it does seem like you don't have anything to say. But if you can open up your mind a little bit to go, hey, I may think that this doesn't matter, or I may think that this is something that's already been said, but it has not been said by you, and it has not been said with your unique lens on the world, right? So that's one of the things I hear all the time. And then the other thing I hear all the time, and this is imposter syndrome, like to the nth degree, I hear a lot of, what did somebody say to me the other day? I don't want to be a pest to my network. And I was like, how would you be a pest? And she was like, well, I'm not posting on LinkedIn very much. And I don't really talk about this stuff. And all of a sudden I'm going to go from not saying anything to saying all this stuff all the time. And like, what if people tune me out, or what if people get sick of me? And I'm like, first of all, We are not on people's minds as much as we think we are. I mean, I don't mean that to be rude. I just mean it that it's a fact. I think about this all the time. Like, oh, my client needs this. And finally, a business friend of mine was like, your client is not thinking about you right now. So there's that, but there's also just this idea that if people do not understand why you want to put your point of view out into the world, then not to say that you don't have to be their friend or you don't have to be in their network, but like, you're not writing for them, right? Like, think about all the people that you are trying to attract that are not those people. Write for them. Strategize your thought leadership for them. Sorry, I always think about things in terms of content and writing. Those are the two things that I hear most often. I don't know if you hear anything that I've missed though.
Yeah, I hear a lot of those same hurdles. I hear a lot around, and this goes for anybody, but it's definitely most prominent in the women that I speak with, because when you start a business, you start putting yourself out there more. That fear of judgment tends to jump in and can really prevent somebody from going after the things that they really want in life and in their business. And I so agree with you, Mel, that at the end of the day, you're going to have people who don't like you or what you're doing. And my question back is, are they even your audience? Because it's okay to repel people. We have to be okay with repelling the wrong people for us. Because do you really want to work with jerks? Do you really want to work with the men that hurt cats, as Mel mentioned earlier? You know,
Well, I don't know how I got on that, Chloe. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. There are people in our lives that are not meant to be in our world. And so it's okay to repel the ones that are not aligned. And we need to be okay with that. And I know that's easier said than done. Yet, when we start to put our voice out into the space, what does that actually open up for us? It opens up magnetizing the people who are aligned, magnetizing the connection and the relationship and all those things that not just help business, but make our lives better. And so, can we talk a little bit about the benefits of putting yourself out there in this way? Because it's a scary thing to do. And it's a lot easier to do scary things when we understand the value of making those big leaps. So, Mel, can you talk a little bit about benefits?
Yeah. So, there are so many benefits. If you can just get over that fear hump, there's so many good things. Like, sorry, I get like excited. So I think the very first thing is that, to your point, Chloe, you attract the people that you're meant to attract, right? And I'm just going to use LinkedIn as an example. There's definitely a myriad of platforms that you can use to get your thought leadership out there, but LinkedIn is kind of mine. And so I just want to chat about that for a second. So I started really leaning into LinkedIn right around the pandemic. It was March 2020. And so this is 4 years of me building my Mel brand on LinkedIn, not just Mel as a person, but Mel as a business owner and Mel as a ghostwriter and a thought leadership strategist. And I have lost count of how many times someone has reached out to me via LinkedIn or given me a comment, or even has gone so far to contact me, like, go to my website, contact me on my contact form and just say, I love how you show up and you are giving me courage to show up in my own way. Courage is a really important part of thought leadership. And it's an important part of business ownership. It's an important part of being a leader. It's, wherever you are, courage plays a huge role, right? And just that by getting yourself out there, that you can be a bright light for someone else is something that it's the most heartwarming, exciting feeling that there is. So I think, like, just at a base level, you're giving people permission to do the same. And frankly, I'm sure other people other than women will, listen to your podcast, but like, we need more women voices in business, in leadership, in everything, right? And that's the biggest benefit. The other benefit is that I think that when you are, again, you have your point of view and you're consistently putting it out, there are so many opportunities that come your way. I mean, and again, it takes consistency, it takes time, it takes practice. Thought leadership is a slow burn. If you take one thing away from this podcast, I want you to take away that thought leadership is a slow burn. But there are podcast opportunities that I have been able to snag because people saw my content on LinkedIn. There are guest blogs I've been able to contribute to. I got featured in US News and World Report a couple weeks ago, which was super exciting. Like, I didn't ask for that. And work, I mean, I've gotten clients because of my thought leadership expertise. And I don't even know if it's so much the point of view, Chloe, as it is just, I mean, we say this all the time, but people want to work with other people. And it's not only that, people want to work with kind people who get it, who get them, and when you are able to put yourself out there and put your content out there in a way that is authentically you, you are able to make that happen. And then the third thing I'll say is, I think that one of the other benefits of thought leadership is, like that saying, it's like, your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I think if that's true, thought leadership is kind of opening yourself up to be in those rooms, right? And so, yes, of course, like having a good reputation or having a solid reputation as a leader, as a business person, that's important. But I think that thought leadership and again, that consistency and that kind of taking people along for the ride that you're on. I have heard so many people be like, oh, I heard about you from this person and I went and, followed you on LinkedIn and I love what you have to say. And now I told this person about you. And it's like, that is the holy grail, right? As a business like mine who runs on referrals, it's like, wow, I just by being myself, I can be in all these places that I didn't even know about. That's pretty amazing. And I think it just speaks to a lot of, when you're able to show up in that way, there's just countless benefits.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, there's been a lot of relationship benefits. There's been stepping into your own evolution as a leader and being able to have opportunities you wouldn't have had if you hadn't authentically shared your own point of view online. So congratulations, by the way, on all the acknowledgement of what you've brought to the table.
I was like, oh, do I talk about that? But, Chloe, I was just thinking about something and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like, you're right. I didn't even think about the fact that you yourself accrue confidence. I mean, I think that's the thing is when you put yourself out there and people start to react and they say, wow, I've never looked at something that way. Or, oh, what you said made me think of a yes and, that now I'm going to talk about. Like, those little comments or, when people do that, like, it's just so, I don't know, it kind of makes you feel unstoppable, in not a too heady way or like, it's not like a heady feeling where you're like, oh, I'm unstoppable. But, you do feel like you're like, oh, I am doing the right thing. All the fear that I felt, all the imposter syndrome that I felt, there are good things coming from this. And the more kind of positive reinforcement you get, and, positive reinforcement is one of my love languages, I think the more confident that you will be to open up even more about your story and your experiences and your point of view.
Yeah. So there's an anecdotal story just from Mel of her experience putting herself out there. I also want to share that there's a lot of research that supports building your authority and your thought leadership that has a more direct return on investment for your business. So you can build your brand awareness and reach new and different people than you had before. There's the opportunity to build that like, know, and trust factor because people are getting to understand who you are and what you stand for. And of course, if they are dealing with an issue that is close to home for them and seeing you as an advocate for them in whatever space or industry that you work in, that has the power to create some brand loyalty for your business and ultimately support you with purchasing decisions and your revenue and profit. So there's a lot of research out there to back up not just the impact you can have, because my goal is to be working with impact-driven women. And I know, Mel, you feel the same way. This is a place for that. So it doesn't just provide impact to people. There is a return on investment for your business as well. Mel, I also want to talk about the fact that you're a small business owner. And, I think when we hear thought leader or building authority, it can sound really intimidating because we tend to jump to the Brene Browns or the Simon Sineks of the world who are absolutely wonderful. And that might not be what everybody wants or what they desire out of their business or their life. And so you are a small business owner, and proof that you can be a thought leader on thought leadership, which is a whole new version of Inception, by the way, a thought leader without necessarily, I mean, and maybe you have a dream one day to do a TED Talk, and that is great, but without hitting, a crazy large audience stage, you can be a thought leader in your everyday life. And so can you talk a little bit about what that looks like for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I'm always really cognizant about is, and, you list two of my favorite people, right? I love Brene. Adam Grant is another one I love. There's just so many people that are doing this kind of work. I think that what I'm always very cognizant about is I'm not trying to do brain surgery here, right? And I don't know any other way to say it besides that old tired trope, but I'm not looking to, necessarily have this incredible new thought that no one else has thought before, right? When I think about, my daily life, when I'm going through, LinkedIn posts or when I'm reading something, I'm always thinking about, what is my reaction to this? Do I agree? Do I disagree? Is there a yes and or a but there that I can, that I can kind of think about? Is this subject matter important to me? And so I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but when I think about, how I kind of decided to develop my thought leadership, it really kind of was this Venn diagram of like, what do I care about and what do I know about, right? And that middle circle or whatever, it gets pretty big sometimes. And so I've really had to hone in on what topics do I care about and what are my content themes, or, I call them content pillars. What do I want to share? And I think that you really have to think about them differently than just like, oh, one of my content pillars is I'm going to share, lessons I've learned, or, one of my content pillars is I'm going to talk about awards I've won. I encourage people to dig deeper than that kind of base level. I'm always thinking about, what are misconceptions in my industry that I want to dispel? What are things that the best practices say that I'm like, nope, sorry, doesn't work. It doesn't work for someone like me. What did me 5 years ago need? And how can I talk to that person? How can I take my own experience as a woman in corporate America who never felt like she belonged? I'm like the biggest corporate weirdo there is. And so how do I take those experiences and put them out there for other people to learn from? And so I think when I think about like what it looks like for me in action, it's just getting super curious about everything. We are so inundated with social media and news and all of these things, and we obviously don't have to talk about all of them. But sometimes things stick in your mind and you're like, I can't let this go. This is important to me. And I really try to keep an eye out or an ear or whatever out for those things, because that is how I've come up with a lot of my platform around, everybody being a thought leader, and how thought leadership doesn't have to mean that, you found like the theory of relativity for your industry. It's really about adding to the conversation and moving it along in a way that makes people kind of shake their head and go, yep. Even if I don't agree, I have to admit you've got a point, So I just think it really starts with, and it's probably a cop-out, but it starts with getting so curious about everything and just really paying attention to, I always call it the tummy tickle. When I read something, or when I look on Instagram, or when I'm looking on LinkedIn and I see someone that posts something, I literally have a feeling in my belly, good or bad, that's like, ooh, I don't like that, or ooh, I love that and I want to add to it, And I think it's actually a really good place to start if you're wanting to do more of this work, but you're just not sure where to begin. Just pay attention to how you feel about the messages that you're constantly being inundated with.
Yeah, definitely. I love that idea of turning to see what you're already reacting to naturally, and then getting super curious about what might be under the surface there. If there's a belief that's coming up or alternative way of thinking that you carry, I think that's a great place to start. I also want to add that opinions are great, but having an opinion on absolutely everything and sharing it with absolutely everyone is not typically the best approach to really marketing in general, but also building your authority. And so for me, it's really about paying attention on what's relevant to your audience. And it can be an extension of the service or product that you have, but really thinking about them and helping them feel seen in what they're going through. And so Mel, how does somebody take their hundreds of opinions that they have consciously or subconsciously acquired throughout their life? How do they narrow that down to 3 to 5 messages that really are the platforms that they want to stand on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that one of the things that I take my thought leadership clients through is I take them through an exercise where we talk about everything. We talk about who you were as a kid. What values did you see in your family life? How did you decide what you wanted to go to school for? Maybe you didn't go to school. What did you decide what you wanted to do for work? And the reason I start at that very, nascent stage is because we did not just, we didn't show up at work one day and go, oh, okay, well, I believe all this stuff I believe. It must be because I have a job now, right? Everything that we value, everything that we care about, everything that we feel deep empathy for, you can trace it back many times to who we were as kids, what we did have, what we didn't have. And so I always kind of encourage people as they're kind of like trying to wrap their arms around their own pillars or their own themes to think about the spectrum of their life and what are the things that have come up for you as these micro moments, I like to call them, right? And so one of my micro moments is when I was 8 years old, I wrote a story about a laughing hyena and I read it, a laughing hyena that had lost its laugh. And I remember reading it out loud to my class. I was terrified. I was a huge ham, but I was terrified because I was like, oh God, I already am a weird kid and that now they're going to not like me. And my class, I remember, had so many questions at the end of the story. Like, well, what happened? Did he ever get his laugh back? Did he ever, and I tell this story because that is when I knew I wanted to be a writer. That's when I knew that it wasn't just about writing a story and like beginning, middle, end. It was captivating people on a level. And one of my content pillars is how to captivate, right? And I don't know if I would have necessarily thought about that if I would have just started when if I just was like looking at thought leadership through the lens of my professional experience, right? And so I think my first step is to just really look at the breadth of your life and think about it more as like, what did I value? What do I feel? What is there a deep reverence for? And most of the time, yes, that will be something in your career and that'll be something in your craft and something that you do. But I think it actually can help you narrow things down if you look at the breadth of your life and go, okay, here are the moments that mattered. And here's what I can talk about as a result. So I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question because it's hard just to kind of get down to like those 5 key things. But I always tell people like, yes, of course you want to talk about what you do for a living or like what you think about something, but also thought leadership is not just about, hard skill expertise, right? It's about how you've gained things like empathy and understanding and compassion and how you've applied that to your work. And so anyway, that's why I love to kind of start, from that entire context of your life. And honestly, if you do that, you will be able to start picking out those themes and going, oh, yeah, I can talk about that.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you speak to is the fact that there are lots of different ways of gaining experience and being able to relate that experience as a thought leader. And so, of course, what's usually recognized more traditionally in the working world is the professional experience and years of work and types of things that you worked on. And of course, there's the educational experience, like going to college or getting an MBA or a credential of some kind. Those are typically what is honored in our workplace. However, there's also lived experience that we gain throughout our life as we grow or experience things that happened to us or that we did, whether that's good or bad. And that is another element of leadership that you can provide to people because you've lived through something. And I think sometimes that can be more valuable as well, because when you've actually lived through a challenge that you are supporting someone else through, you become more approachable. You become somebody that they know understands them in a deep way that somebody who's never been through that before can. And so I love that you are talking about these messages don't have to just be something that you learned in your career, but it's also something that you've learned or gained through your life. Like I think about when I became a mom and how much my identity shifted as a mom. And you hear, when you become a mom, you see the world differently. But it's one thing to hear that phrase, and it's an entirely different thing to experience it. And so, that's just one idea of identity shifting. And the same thing happens when you leave a career and start your own business, or, when you are writing and presenting to a classroom and realizing that you have a deep love for something and the people around you are finding it incredibly engaging and interesting. And that shift happens in those micro moments and in those macro moments. And those are things that you can rely on as part of your thought leadership in your messaging and the way you show up in the world as well. So I just love taking that large view and then shrinking it down into what matters. I also know, Mel, that the topics that you recommend change for people as they grow and evolve, because something that we learned 3 years ago, we might find out more information about, right? And when we know better, we do better. And so that might evolve too, as what you decide on today as your thought leadership topics in a couple years, you'll need to revisit and see what those are. Or trends might emerge, right? That are going on in your industry or in the world. And we have to be flexible and willing to understand the impact of all the other little interconnected pieces that impact the people we serve and the topics that we talk about. So
I just want to say a quick story about a client that I just started working with. And so she's a former VP of people or SVP of people ops. And so, of course, like her entire role throughout her 2 decades of people ops experience was, just having a very deep care and understanding of, what people are going through and really wanting to kind of get rid of the misconceptions around, paper pushing HR people and kind of all that. And then she decided to leave that job. And now she is a career coach. She's helping executives manage big transitions like layoffs. And, she calls them career quakes, which I love. But anyway, one of the things that we've been working on is really kind of bringing more of what makes her into her expertise. And she said to me a couple weeks ago, she's like, I've always had this mischievous streak. And so she told me this story about when she was 5 and, there was something that she did and it was just very mischievous. And she's like, that's actually what I bring into my coaching. There's a little bit of mischief there. There's a little bit of like, what you could do. And that's one of her content pillars now. And so that's what I mean when I talk about like, and I think like everything that you said just totally like cements that too, is just that we know who we are from a very young age. And so I love that there are certain pieces that will shift, but there are certain pieces that will never go away. And it's really about how you adapt them to all of the hats professionally that you're going to wear throughout your life.
Yeah, I'm actually picturing like a homecoming, right? Because sometimes, actually, I shouldn't say sometimes, most of the time as we grow, we get conditioned by the outside world or, families and things like that put on these expectations of us. And we tend to lose a part of ourselves as we grow up. And what I'm hearing from you is really like this homecoming to who you were as a child and those natural skills and interests that are really a part of who you are, but tend to get washed down or washed away as we age. And so that's really about, again, being authentic and coming back to that inner child in us that wants to be mischievous or silly or playful or curious, and being able to have that show up today as an adult and as a leader. I think that's what ends up charming people, right? And like magnetizing people is they want to be around people who are authentically them.
Yep, 100%. As you were talking, I was thinking about this like funny image. And I think this is why people get so weird or up in arms about thought leadership, because it literally feels like you've got some like old white dude on a mountain and he's like, I'm a thought leader. And, so he like says his thoughts, and everyone's kind of looking at him. And then he goes back to wherever and everyone's like, what just happened? And so I think that is, again, it points to kind of the antiseptic nature of this, or like I don't know, it's like just this washed feeling of like, a thought leader, it isn't just thoughts about business. It's not just thoughts about expertise. It's all of these things kind of wrapped up. And the more that we're able to share, and I get it, vulnerability is a thing. Everyone has a vulnerability spectrum where they're like, look, I'm an open book. Or, look, I don't want to I really just want to stick to business. And that's fine, right? But you have to find a way to let your authentic self shine through, because it is going to be a pretty hard sell to others if you are just kind of spouting off education or spouting off expertise and there's no there for people to kind of react to and kind of snuggle up to in a way. I think good thought leadership makes people feel seen, as you said, heard. But I think it also makes people feel a little safe. It makes people feel okay to be like, oh yeah, I feel that too. Or, I don't feel that, but I feel this. And now I feel like that's okay to feel that way. Of course it's okay to feel that way, I mean,
yes,
for most things.
Yes, it's bringing humanity back into business. And it can be really easy to forget that at the end of the day, people want to do business with people. Most of us, especially in the service-based industries like coaching, consulting, agencies that matter, it's a relationship business. And so, yes, you can talk just about business, but you got to figure out how to bring some humanity into what you're talking about business. And so that does require a different type of creativity to bring that in.
And it's so much easier. Being yourself is so much easier than trying to be someone else. I lost track of in corporate, and I'm sure that you can relate to this too, Chloe, in your agency background, but it's like, I lost track of how many masks I was trying to wear and how many different people I was trying to be, because I thought that was what leadership was supposed to be, right? And I think that one of the things that I love about true thought leadership is that you really get to see someone as they are. And it's so much less work than trying to fake it and be someone else. And people see right through that anyway, right? So I don't know, I like that part of the business that we're in.
Absolutely. So say somebody is listening to this podcast and they are super jazzed about getting started on thought leadership. What would you recommend their first step be?
So I think the first step is I always start with 3 questions. What do you believe? What do you want? And why does it matter? And honestly, even if you're not a journaler, journal on it and don't give yourself any limitations or anything. Just start to think really critically. Like, when it comes to my industry, what are my answers to those 3 questions? When it comes to who I am as a human being and, how I interact with people or how I build relationships, what do I believe? What do I want? What's that end goal for me? And I honestly feel like when you have those really fundamental questions, you can start to pick out those things that make you you, and you can literally start to kind of see patterns in it. You can start to circle similar words. Like, I remember just circling curiosity 10 times, and I was like, oh, this is one of my values. This is what I hold dear. How am I going to talk about curiosity as part of my thought leadership? And so I think just starting out with some really foundational questions and kind of just getting to that point. And there's a great Harvard Business Review article about this. I can't remember what it's called, but thinking about our careers, not in terms of a career path, but career connections, right? So think about all of the roles that you play personally and professionally, all of the jobs you've had. What did you like about those things? How did you get to use your skills? So that's another way to kind of start to do it. That's a bit more tailored to like your professional life. But like, what are the connections that you can make between all of the different hats you wear, all of the different roles you've played, all the different things you love? What are the 3 to 4 things that are just really obvious? I remember doing this exercise, and one of the things that came out for me is like, all my life. And I think it's because I was born into a very, very blue collar family. We didn't have a ton of money. I lived in a trailer court for the first couple of years of my life. And I remember doing this exercise and I was like, wow, everything I've ever done in my life has been predicated on, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. Everything is figure outable, right? I think it's Marie Forleo. But then that became one of my pillars too, is just this idea that it is so important to me to figure it out because I don't know any other way forward than that. Everything I've done in my life I've always had to move forward. And so when you start to ask yourself those fundamental questions or even trace your path of what you've done in your life, you will start to see patterns. I promise you.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of finding that through line with your education, your professional experience, your lived experience. What are those through lines that have common themes? Because that can be a great place to anchor your messaging and what you want to be known for.
Agreed.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is I know you mentioned earlier that thought leadership is a slow burn. And I would love to hear from you. I have my own thoughts, but I would love to hear from you. What makes this method of leadership and marketing a slow burn compared to paid social ads, for example? What about this is different?
So here's my spicy take, which is all of marketing is really a slow burn. But having said that, I think that the reason why it's a slow burn is twofold. So first of all, you have to really get clear, just like you do as when you're marketing a product or a service, you have to get clear on who you are, what you stand for, what your audience is, what your goals are. And that takes time within you. So I've been in business full time for 5 years. It's only been in the past, I'd say 18 months that I have become crystal clear on what I want to do, who I want to serve, what I want people to know, and how I'm consistently telling that story, right? So that's the first reason why it's a slow burn, because it just takes some marination. You're marinating for, sometimes several months. The other part is that it is really scary to let people see you. And I don't care how confident you are, it's always a scary thing. And so the reason that it's a slow burn is you start out small, right? And you obviously don't have to, but I was one of those people that right out the gate, I really didn't know what I believed. I didn't know what I wanted to say. And so I started testing things. I started just kind of getting things out there on LinkedIn. I mean, nothing that, I would come to regret later, but just things that I was like, ooh, I've always been thinking this way about this, or, ooh, I wonder if anyone else is thinking this. And I paid attention to what my audience was looking for and what they wanted. And I, paid attention to the engagement and all of that stuff. But it's different than a paid social ad because you can track that social ad, right? You can track to say, oh, well, I got this many clicks. They went to my site. They filled out a lead gen form and blah, 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 right? Thought leadership is different because it is human to human marketing, and there's no replacement for how much time it takes to build a relationship with somebody. I have a client right now and I've talked with them several times, but they're always very frustrated whenever they post something, they pour their heart out and there's no engagement. There's 3 likes, right? And that can be incredibly frustrating. I've been there before. I posted something yesterday and I was like, oh, it's going to be great. And it was fine, but you have to remember that engagement is not the only metric here. And it's not even the most important metric, because just think about how we are as human beings. Every time someone says something awesome, Chloe, do you pick up the phone and go, hey, Mel, you said something really awesome and I just want to let you know about it? We do not do that in our daily lives. I don't like everyone's LinkedIn posts. I barely text my mom back, And so I think the point is we're waiting for all of this external validation, and sometimes it doesn't come and we get discouraged, but it takes the time it takes. And especially if you're depending on digital channels, there's algorithms to think about. LinkedIn, for example, just, kind of blew up its algorithm again. And so everyone's having low engagement and low reach. And, it's not for the faint of heart. I will say that.
Yes. I couldn't agree more with both of those. And I also want to add that when we think about traditional marketing, we are thinking about engagement and followers and some of those more vanity metrics, so to speak. We're also thinking about people downloading our free guide or lead magnets and getting on our email list and all those kind of, as you said, like it's a straight line from A to B. Maybe not 100%, but a lot of the time it is. Whereas, and the goal for that is to get them into your funnel. With thought leadership, yes, there is a secondary goal from a business standpoint, but the main goal is really about building credibility and trust. And I don't know about you, Mel, but I think there's a lot of research out there, and from my own experience, that usually you don't trust a paid ad the way you would a person. And so that's just something that we have to think about is when we think about relationship building, it requires us to keep showing up. You can't just have one conversation with somebody and implicitly trust them. That's not how relationships work. And so it's about showing up. It's about also sharing your message consistently, maybe in different ways and different subtopics, but sharing consistently so somebody knows what to know you for, and developing that credibility and trust because you're not going away. And so I think that can also kind of get lost a little bit in the thought leadership realm.
I always tell people to think about thought leadership as, maybe you and I disagree on this, I don't know, but I don't think of thought leadership as a marketing tool. I think about thought leadership as a trust building, relationship building, connection building tool that does act as a marketing agent to get you business. It's not the easiest. It's not the fastest. To your point, it's definitely not a direct line where you can be like, oh, I see how many people downloaded my lead magnet, right? But I guarantee you that when you are able to build, your own thought leadership ethos, that it will become a marketing engine for you. But I think the shift has to happen where you're like, because I see this a lot where people are like, I'm posting all the time. I'm not getting any business. Why? And I'm like, it's because you're thinking about thought leadership and the platforms that you're using for it differently. Yes, those platforms are used for marketing. Yes, messaging is an important marketing component. Building trust is an important marketing component. But I have had to make that shift where I'm like, this is not about getting business, at least in the short term. This is about building my messaging, building my credibility. And to your point, the only person I ever trusted right away broke my heart, right? And so, I want people to feel comfortable with me. I want them to like what I'm having to say, but trust just takes time. And that is what thought leadership is.
Yeah, we can all reflect and remember a time in which we got burned. And so naturally we get more skeptical, and it takes time to build that trust. I couldn't agree with you more though, Mel. I think marketing comes secondary when it comes to thought leadership. And thought leadership is really about leadership at the end of the day. So you could be an internal thought leader at a business. You can be a C-suite thought leader. You can be an entrepreneur thought leader. It's really about leadership, trust, and the intention needs to be rooted in impact. So to me, it's really, this is how you're going to make an impact. And lucky for me, doing this also helps me grow my business in all the ways we've talked about. It's a lot harder to measure directly the impact of thought leadership. And yet the research shows that buyers trust people in businesses more when they see thought leadership content. It's a way to cultivate culture if you have a team, because they can rally around a purpose and mission that they're on board with. They can see that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, it's a talent acquisition tool. Like, we haven't even talked about like all of the ways that I always look at it through the lens of a business owner. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chloe. I just was like, oh my God, like I didn't even think about like all this stuff around, right? It's around rallying around a mission and vision. If you have a manager that is a thought leader and like just can think about things in a different way, you want to work for that person. You want to work for that company, and you'll be more loyal. You'll be engaged. And the talent acquisition opportunity for thought leadership is just immense too. People want to work with people that have cool ideas and they're trustworthy and they're empathetic and yeah, all that stuff. I love it.
People want to leave their mark on the world in whatever shape and form that looks like for them. And so when they see a leader who genuinely wants to make a difference, that attracts the right talent, people are more likely to give their time and energy and money to support you. It's huge. So absolutely. The second to last question that I have for you would be that I want to talk a little bit about when we do think about the marketing aspect and where you show up. I think we also tend to think of thought leaders as people who hit the keynote stage, right? They're the TED Talks, the major conferences, they're those people. And yes, absolutely. But you can also, if public speaking is not your jam and it's not a goal of yours, that's okay. You can also demonstrate thought leadership in lots of other ways. I know for me, I work with clients on helping them have the skills and strategies to be able to navigate an interview with a podcaster or journalist and really make sure that their message gets across. And it's an intermediary audience where they are using someone else's already built up audience to share a message. And there's a lot of credibility in that. However, some people don't want to do interviews with journalists too. So Mel, what other channels in the marketing world could somebody use thought leadership and share those 3 to 5 messages with the people that matter most? Where could they do that?
Yeah. So, obviously social media is a great place for this. I know, Chloe, you're definitely more of the Instagram, you're more Instagram, I'm more LinkedIn, but maybe you might get into LinkedIn a little bit. But like both of those platforms are so great for really kind of warming people up to you, having them understand what you believe in. I call LinkedIn is your own personal public relations firm. Like, you get to set your messaging. You get to set when it goes out. You get to set what you say. You get to set the words that you use. No one is doing that for you. I mean, LinkedIn does, put you in LinkedIn jail for, I don't know, I've never been in it, so I'm not sure. But it is such a great way to showcase your own thought leadership. However, the thing that we have to remember about social media is that we are beholden to algorithms. We're beholden to people who want to make money on advertising. And so one of the things that I always tell people is don't build your house on real estate you don't own. Build a rental property on the real estate you don't own. And so, anything can be a thought leadership channel. Obviously, your website, a lot of people look at websites and they're like, oh, people need to know the services I provide and they need to have a couple case studies. And it's like, no, your entire thought leadership ethos should be on your website, right? And that goes for brands too. Brands need to have their point of view on their website. And I know that we talk a lot about being customer centric and we talk about we shouldn't talk about ourselves because, we need to talk about what we do for our customers. And I think that that's true to a point, but people are not going to buy from you if they don't know who you are. So, whether it's an about page or who we are and why we're different, that needs to be part of your ethos as well. And then, the other part I would say is, I know that you already mentioned it, but it's there are so many opportunities to get earned media opportunities, whether they're podcasts, whether somebody's looking for a quick 1 or 2 sentences for a blog they're writing. There are so many ways to do this other than getting on a stage. I personally, I only started to have a desire to be on a stage this year. And so social media is kind of my jam just because I can control the message. I can say whatever I want to say for the most part, and my audience is there. And so I think that thought leadership can be definitely, kind of given and dispersed throughout a bunch of different channels.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much opportunity to weave it into what you're already doing from a marketing standpoint. So yes, speaking engagements is one way, journalists and podcast interviews is another, writing op-eds or having a column for a publication is an option, your blog, your own podcast if you have one, even your free guides and lead magnets can have some grounding in your thought leadership topics. So this isn't something that you have to, once you know what you want to talk about, this is something that you can naturally weave into the things you're already doing for your business. And there's also even greater opportunity once you have these topics to be invited into other spaces to talk. And so that could be a speaking engagement, but that could also be a webinar or a LinkedIn Live or something else that enables you to get in front of audiences, because people start to see the value you have to share with their audiences that they have nourished and cultivated as well. So some things to think about in terms of, now you know a little bit more on our take of thought leadership and what is important and what isn't, how to define it. Would love for you to define that for yourself. And now you know a couple ways to start putting that into practice. So thank you so much, Mel. I could talk for literally hours with you about this and still have so many follow-up questions. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2 down the road. But would love for you to share a little bit about where people can find you and learn more about what you do.
Sure. So my website is a great place to go. So it's www.workwithpeapod.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. Just search for Melissa Ripp, last name RIPP. And I'm also on Instagram. My personal Instagram is @PeapodMel, and my business Instagram is @PeapodMarketing.
Awesome. Thank you, Mel. We're going to also leave all of those links and opportunities to connect with Mel in the show notes. And just a big thank you, Mel, for being my first podcast guest. I couldn't think of a better person to help get this topic kicked off.
Oh, I'm so honored, Chloe. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, invite your entrepreneur friends to tune in. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram @WesthavenCoaching. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on today's episode and continue the conversation with you there. And before you go, be sure to download my free guide, 5 Steps to Building Your Authentic Authority, which will walk you through how to grow your thought leadership in a way that's true to who you are and what you stand for. You can find the guide at westhavencoaching.com/steps or follow the link in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. Together, we are changing the faces and voices of thought leadership. Until next time, keep leading with authenticity and impact.